The story labeled The Man in the Drain is the precursor to this story, so if you want to hear how we got to telling this one, you'll want to watch that one first. By looking at his record, Jimmy McElroy was not a great person. He did a stint in Sanquintin for 1 year and 4 months that started in January of 2005 for a severe domestic violence case with 10 charges that included inflicting corporal injury, child endangerment, obstruction, and failure to appear. Inflicting corporal injury is defined as willfully inflicting a physical injury resulting in a traumatic condition on an intimate partner. Typically, the injuries are visible but could also include internal injuries. Child endangerment is the charge filed whenever a child is present during a domestic violence occurrence. It doesn't necessarily mean that the child was harmed, but had the potential to be. After his release, he was put on parole and went back to Crescent City, California, where it is unclear how he became the roommate of an elderly woman who lived in a mobile home park at the north end of town, as there is no record of his relation to her or how they became involved, but it was mentioned that they had lived together for years. There is also a significant age gap between the roommates. He was 42 at the time of his death, and when she was sentenced, she was 80 years old. So now I'm sure you're all thinking, 80? There's no way an 80-year-old lady killed a 42-year-old guy with the previous charge of domestic violence. It has to be self-defense. And after reviewing some of the information, that's where my mind went to, except it was never brought up. She simply said that she didn't do it. Another bit of interesting information stated in the article written about the murder of James McElroy is that he was a paralyzed parolee. It was said that he was partially paralyzed on his right side and mentally ill. There's no mention of him being paralyzed before prison, so one could assume that this happened during his time at San Quentin. Being mentally ill also could have happened following his incarceration, because if he sustained an injury that paralyzed him, he likely would have been put into solitary confinement, which has been proven to severely distort the human psyche. A study performed back in the 1950s when University of Wisconsin psychologist Harry Harlow put monkeys in a chamber he called the Pit of Despair. This Pit of Despair was an upside-down triangle-shaped chamber with slick sides making it impossible to climb out. After a few days, he noted they would give up and just sit in the bottom hunched up. He noted later on when they were kept in isolation, they would develop a blank stare and would also rock back and forth in their cages or just circle that cage and resort to mutilating themselves. The ones who stayed in for about 12 months, he reported as the isolation almost obliterating the animals socially. Human studies of isolation are rare due to the newfound human rights laws. But in 1951, McGill University paid a group of men to participate in a study where they would stay in small chambers. They had a bed, goggles, and headphones, and they could only leave to go to the bathroom. They planned the study for 6 weeks, but all the subjects had dropped out by day 7. Many students reported not being able to think clearly about anything, seeing hallucinations, or seeing repetitive patterns of things that weren't there, like dogs or glasses. So it's likely someone who is restricted to solitary confinement would also suffer some of these same effects, except they do not have a choice. It's not voluntary and paid where they can say, sorry, I just can't do this anymore and leave. They stay in solitary for years in some cases, and solitary is run as 23 hours in the cell with 1 hour of outside time alone. They eat in their cell, sleep in their cell, and go to the bathroom in their cell, only leaving that one time every day. The only time they see anyone is when they're being given food or being let outside and back into their cell. Harvard Medical School Board certified psychiatrist Stuart Gracian has interviewed hundreds of prisoners who were held in solitary confinement, where he concluded 1/3 of the inmates interviewed were actively psychotic and suicidal. He documented an array of symptoms that were the direct result of solitary confinement: hallucinations, impulse control issues, hypersensitivity, paranoia, obsessions, a diminished ability to remain alert and aware, and a greatly reduced ability to concentrate or retain information. Up to 2/3 of prisoners in solitary are believed to have some form of mental illness. A Pelican-Bay-State-Prison psychologist, Craig Haney, studied the inmates and concluded that prisoners in solitary lose control over their day-to-day lives, and they lose the ability to initiate control over their own behavior. Most of the time, those who have been in solitary confinement are a danger to themselves, as they have a higher self-mutilation and suicide rate. With all of this taken into consideration, there are many likely events that could have unfolded leading up to McElroy's death. The fact that McElroy was partially paralyzed definitely leveled the playing field for his 80-year-old roommate, but she's 80, and was said to have stabbed McElroy 4 times in the neck, 3 times in the back, and once in the side. There's no information as to a reason for this other than the DA on the case said she wanted him out and she got him out. Who knows why she wanted him out so badly, but with the limited information that exists, there are so many different scenarios that could have played out. After 80-year-old verarehfeld stabbed James McElroy a total of 8 times, he lay dead on the floor for 3 days, and Vera remained living in the home during this time. On January 29th, 3 days after the last time McElroy was seen, his body was found by Vera's son-in-law, who had dialed 911. During the investigation, a blood trail was found between the living room and the bedroom that, according to the DA, indicated that Vera attempted to clean up the crime scene. The DA would also state that every bit of evidence led back to Vera, and her attorney argued that the case was not proven beyond reasonable doubt. After the jury deliberated, Vera was found guilty of McElroy's murder, where she was sentenced to 25 years to life. Vera never made any revelations as to why and maintained her innocence by saying she did not commit the crime, but she was not afraid to go to prison because she's the healthiest that she's been in years. I have a few thoughts on this after reviewing all of the information. The first thought I had was due to her age, she was covering for someone that she loves, and I would be very interested to see the evidence, as it's common for stabbings to generate cuts on the individual who did the stabbings' hands. Regardless of her being healthy or in good shape for her age, she went toe-to-toe with a man half of her age, and I've not found the exact information on the partial paralysis of McElroy, but partial paralysis generally refers to an injury where the individual still has some feeling and likely control over the paralyzed muscle, so he was not necessarily in a wheelchair. I was able to find a small blip of information that Vera did try to appeal her case, but the link was broken and I couldn't find any solid information on this appeal or the outcome. And if Vera is still alive, she would be 96 today. And if she's still in prison, she would have 9 more years to serve on her sentence to get just to the 25 years. I'm not sure what happened to lead Vera to stab McElroy, and I'm not sure why his spirit decided to save my daughter. I'm just thankful that he did. Maybe he visited her to tell someone the truth and that she was just too young to understand and relay the message. I do not personally know James McElroy or Vera, but I do know the legal system in Delnortecounty can be very lax on investigations and harsh to people they don't like. James may not have even been responsible for the crime he originally went to prison for and came out injured and in a state of psychosis, which changed the dynamic between him and Vera, leading her to take the course of action that she did. If it was even Vera who was responsible. I guess we'll never know, but I'm hoping someone who has additional information and insight listens to this and sets it all straight. I am so interested to know what actually happened here because it all seems so questionable. And that's going to do it for this story. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed telling it. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like, love, leave me a comment. If you actually know what happened, please leave a comment. Please tell me I'm wrong and set the whole thing straight for me. I would love that. Subscribe so you never miss an installment. Hit notifications so you're always notified when a new one becomes available.